our guest speaker for today, the well-known journalist and Chief Executive of Barnardos, Mr. Fergus Finlay.
The English writer Tony Harrison captured the whole idea of bereavement, what it means and how we deal with it, in a short poem that reads as follows. Though my mother was already 2 years dead, Dad kept her slippers warming by the gas, put hot water bottles her side of the bed, and still went to renew her transport pass. You couldn't just drop in, you had to phone. He'd put you off an hour to give him time to clear away her things and look alone, as though his still raw love were such a crime. He couldn't risk my blight of disbelief, though sure that very soon he'd hear her key scrape in the rusted lock and end his grief. He knew she'd just popped out to get the tea. I believe life ends with death, and that's all. You haven't both gone shopping. Just the same, in my black leather phone book, there's your name and the disconnected number I still call. We all know that feeling, I think. Indeed, Bob Geldof talked about it on the Late Late Show recently when he said how difficult it was to delete his late sister's number from his mobile phone. He made a distinction between the natural passing of his elderly father and the sudden death of the sister who'd always been there for him. Painful as any loss is, dealing with the loss caused by suicide is different in all sorts of ways. I'm still haunted by the experience of a little 10-year-old boy whose story I first came to know 5 years ago. He was the one who found his father. He found his father's body, dead by his own hand, in the garage of their house. And there was a note beside the body addressed to him, in block capitals so he could read it. The note began by saying how sorry his father was that things hadn't worked out. And it ended by telling his 10-year-old boy, "You're the man of the house now, son." That letter was the start of a long and difficult journey for a 10-year-old boy. He was now suddenly carrying burdens that no 10-year-old should have to carry. Responsibility for his mother and his younger brother and sister. Responsibility imposed on him in a way that no child can cope with. And alongside responsibility, a lot of pain. Not just the pain of loss, acute though that was, but the pain of unanswered questions. And of course, the biggest question of all, why? Why did this happen? Why did my father have to go? Everyone who has survived the loss of a loved one through suicide knows the questions that plague us. Could I have done something different? Could I have spotted the signs? We know that hand in hand with a sense of loss go other conflicting emotions: anger, shame, guilt, sometimes even the desire to follow, to end our own pain. And this little boy had all of that. Two feelings, above all, threatened for a while to overwhelm him. "It's my fault," he kept saying. "If I'd been a better son, my dad would still be here." He remembered an incident when his father had shouted at him because he'd stolen something from a neighbour's shopping trolley. In exasperation, his father had said, "You'll be the death of me." And he knew somehow that that had been a trigger. But he also knew that his father had died alone, and for him that was even worse than the manner of his father's death. "He must have been hurting," he said once. "I didn't listen. I couldn't have cared." That little boy needed good professional support, and luckily he got it. Through the skill of a bereavement counsellor, he gradually came to understand and eventually accept that some questions don't have ready answers. He came to understand that his own feelings were nothing to be ashamed of, even that they weren't unusual. He was lucky in one other respect as well. His mother had suffered a terrible blow in the loss of her young husband, a loss that had come out of the blue and left her financially burdened as well as in pain. But she knew immediately that this was a pain they would all have to bear together, she and her children, and they could only bear it if they really were together. More than anyone else, she helped her son to make a new beginning by being honest with him and by ensuring that he always knew he had a friend who'd put up with tantrums, a friend to whom he could tell anything. She made him her equal, and together they tried to puzzle out the questions to which there is no answer. 5 years later, he has grown. He's doing his junior cert this year, and he'll do fine. There'll always be an ache, and there'll always be questions in his head. But he knows now that it's okay, that it's not necessary always to have all the answers. He knows his dad loved him, just as he knows his mum will always be there for him. He's made the beginning that's possible to make, expecting no more of himself than he can manage. And he knows, as Brendan Kennelly put it in his poem, that you can begin again despite all odds. So let me finish, if I may, by quoting some of the lines of that poem, a poem that shows that it is possible to cope with grief and loss and unanswered questions, provided we're not alone. Begin to the loneliness that cannot end, since it perhaps is what makes us begin. Begin to wonder at unknown faces, at crying birds in the sudden rain, at branches stark in the willing sunlight, at seagulls foraging for bread, at couples sharing a sunny secret, alone together while making good. Though we live in a world that dreams of ending, that always seems about to give in, something that will not acknowledge conclusion insists that we forever begin.